Welcome back, friends. I've got a new set of stories ready for you. We're aiming for 1,000 subscribers, and every click makes a big difference. If you enjoy what you hear, please subscribe. It truly helps. After the first 10 minutes, the volume will gently fade lower, and the screen will turn black so you can relax without distractions. Now, let's get started. Story 1. My kids refused to visit me in the hospital, so I left everything to the nurse who did. I never thought I'd spend the last chapter of my life staring at the ceiling of a sterile hospital room, listening to the faint beeping of machines, waiting for someone who never came. I'd lie there, counting the seconds, the hours, the days, hoping no, begging for the sound of familiar footsteps, the shuffle of my children's shoes in the hallway, a knock at the door, anything. That meant I wasn't forgotten. But the silence stretched on, and when the door finally did creak open, it wasn't my son or my daughter standing there. It was a nurse, tired-eyed but smiling, her hand carrying a cup of water she didn't even need to bring. She said, "I thought you might be thirsty." That small gesture cut deeper than the absence of my own flesh and blood, because she cared enough to notice I was still human, while my children, well, they decided I wasn't. Worth the trip. I used to tell myself they were busy, that life got in the way, that surely, deep down, they still loved me. But do you know how fast that illusion shatters when you overhear your son telling the doctor on the phone, "No, I can't come. I've got work. He'll be fine." Fine. As if dying slowly in a hospital bed with no one holding your hand is fine. As if being abandoned by the very people you raised is fine. I wasn't fine. And the truth is, I wasn't just grieving the illness eating away at me. I was grieving the loss of a family I thought I had. It didn't start this way. Once upon a time, I had dreams, like any father does. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I gave them stability, a roof over their heads, hot meals every night, they'd grow up knowing they were loved. That love would come back to me when I needed it most. But life has a cruel way of showing you where you stand. And apparently, my place in their lives was far below convenience, career, and whatever new excuse they decided to cling to. I remember one night, my daughter Emily called. My heart nearly leapt out of my chest. Finally, I thought, she misses me. She cares. But she didn't ask how I was. She didn't even pretend to. She went straight into talking about money, about the house, the accounts, what would happen when the time comes. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her, "Do you hear yourself? Do you realize your father is lying in a hospital bed, and all you can think about is what's in it for you?" But my voice caught in my throat. I just told her I wasn't ready to discuss that. She sighed, frustrated, as though I were inconveniencing her by not dying fast enough. I hung up the phone, staring at the ceiling again, my chest hollowed out like someone had scooped my heart out with a spoon. That was the night I started to feel something shift inside me, a cold clarity. If my children couldn't bother to show up while I was still breathing, then why in the world should they reap the rewards of my life once I was gone? You see, I didn't just have a house. I didn't just have some savings tucked away. I had built something a lifetime of sacrifice, years of grinding through jobs I hated, nights I went hungry so they didn't have to, vacations I skipped so they could have clothes and school supplies. All of it, I thought, was for them. But lying there in that bed, I realized maybe it wasn't meant for them after all. Maybe it was meant for someone who actually gave a damn about whether I lived or died. That's when I started to notice her, the nurse. Her name was Claire. She didn't just check vitals and scribble on a clipboard. She'd sit for a minute, even when she didn't have to. She'd ask about the old photographs I kept on the nightstand. She'd say things like, "Your wife was beautiful, wasn't she?" And I'd nod, my throat tightening, because it had been years since anyone cared enough to bring her up. She made me feel like a person again, not a burden, not a countdown on a chart. And it hit me one evening when she tucked the blanket around me the way my late wife used to. Family isn't blood. Family is who shows up. My kids didn't show up. She did. I started replaying memories in my head, the baseball games I never missed, the late night talks in the car, the countless times I said yes when I wanted to say no. For what? So they could turn into people who saw me as an obstacle instead of a father? I'll never forget the morning I told the doctor, "Call the lawyer." He looked at me strangely, but he did it. And when the lawyer came, sitting there with his polished shoes and briefcase, I spoke words I never thought I'd say. "I want to change my will." He blinked at me. Change it? To what? And I told him slowly, deliberately, with every ounce of resolve in my chest. Everything. I own everything I've worked for goes to Claire, the nurse, the one who visits me, the one who cares. He stared at me, stunned, as though I had lost my mind. Maybe I had. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was taking back control of something that had been slipping away from me for decades, my dignity. That night, when Claire came in with her tired smile, I almost told her. I almost said, "You don't know it yet, but you're about to inherit my whole life." But I didn't, not yet. First, I needed to see if my children would notice what they were about to lose. And that, my friend, is where this story really begins. When I was younger, I used to believe that being a father meant unconditional love, a kind of contract written in blood, unshakable, eternal. I thought no matter what happened, my kids would be my anchor, the ones who would stand by me when the world grew cold and my body grew weak. I clung to that belief like scripture. But the older I got, the more cracks I began to see. Subtle things at first. Missed birthdays. Excuses about busy schedules. Quick phone calls that ended faster than they began. You don't notice the pattern right away. Not when you're blinded by hope. But when you're stuck in a hospital bed. With nothing but time, those patterns scream at you louder than any alarm. Emily, my daughter, was the first to pull away. When her mother died, she was only 20, still trying to find her way in the world. I tried to be there for her. I really did. I drove across town to help her move into her first apartment, bought groceries when she couldn't afford them, even paid off one of her credit card bills without telling her. But somewhere along the line, she started treating me less like a father and more like a safety net. Our conversations shifted from, "How are you, Dad?" to, "Can you spot me some money?" And though I told myself it was just a phase, deep down, I felt the distance growing. My son, Michael, was different. He was always ambitious, always chasing the next big thing. He worked long hours, got promotions, climbed the ladder faster than I could even understand. I admired his drive, but that drive built walls. Conversations with him became transactional updates about his job, his new car, his plans for the future. He never asked about my day. He never seemed interested in my world, unless it somehow intersected with his. And I let it happen because I told myself, he's busy. He'll come around when I really need him. But here's the thing. When you finally really need someone, that's when you see the truth. And my truth was brutal. The first week in the hospital, I told myself not to worry. They didn't come by because they were adjusting to the news. Maybe it scared them to see their father in a hospital gown, hooked up to machines. I told myself they just needed time. But by the second week, my optimism began to wither. Every time the nurse walked in with her soft voice and tired eyes, part of me wanted it to be them. But it never was. Then came Emily's call about the money. And Michael's blunt refusal to visit. Those weren't just absences, they were rejections. They were telling me, in their own cruel way, that I didn't matter enough. Not alive, at least. Dead? Well, sure. My name still meant a house, an account, a pile of assets they could squabble over. Alive? I was just an obstacle. I remember one night in particular. The rain was beating against the window, and the sound of thunder rolled through the building. It reminded me of when the kids were little, how they'd come running into our bed during storms. Emily with her teddy bear, Michael clutching the blanket, their little bodies pressed against me, and their mother seeking comfort. And now? Now the storm raged outside, and I lay alone, wondering if they even remembered those nights. Claire noticed the look on my face. She always noticed. She pulled up a chair and asked if I wanted company. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. She didn't say much that night. She just sat there, humming softly while the rain fell. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel completely abandoned. That was the moment I started to realize she wasn't just doing her job. She cared. She saw me. And the bitter irony was that a stranger in scrubs gave me more love in one evening than my children had in years. The lawyer came back a few days later with a draft of the new will. He slid the papers across the tray table, and my hands trembled as I signed them. Not from doubt, no, that was long gone. My hands shook from the weight of it all. The finality? With every stroke of the pen, I wasn't just leaving my estate to Claire. I was rewriting my legacy. I was choosing to give meaning to my life in a way my children refused to. After it was done, I leaned back in bed, exhausted. The lawyer looked at me, almost pitying, and said, "You know this will cause a fight." I chuckled, though it came out more like a wheeze. "Let them fight," I said. "It'll be the most passion they've shown about me in years." I didn't tell Claire right away. Not because I didn't want her to know, but because I wanted to see what would happen next. Call it morbid curiosity. Call it a test of fate. I wanted to give my children one last chance. One final window to prove me wrong. So I waited. I left. The door open, literally and figuratively. I waited for Emily to call just to check in, for Michael to appear at the foot of my bed, awkward but present. I prayed for it, even though I told myself I had stopped praying long ago, but nothing came. Days passed, weeks. My body grew weaker, the pain sharper, but their absence stayed the same. And then something happened that ripped the last shred of illusion from me. Emily finally came to the hospital, but not to see me. She showed up to ask the front desk for a copy of my medical records. I only found out because one of the nurses mentioned it casually, thinking I already knew. My daughter came to my hospital, stood in the lobby, and didn't even bother to walk down the hall to see her father. She just wanted to know how long she had to wait. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and a cold clarity washed over me. The kind of clarity that doesn't leave room for second chances. My children weren't coming. Not now. Not ever. And if that was the choice they made, then I had to make mine. And oh, I made it. The night after I learned Emily had come to the hospital only to gather paperwork, her cold, calculated move to measure how soon she might collect her share, I barely slept. I kept turning it over in my head, trying to picture her face. Was there even a flicker of guilt? Did she hesitate before leaving? Did she glance down the hallway toward my room, wondering if maybe she should visit? Or did she just grab the files and head straight back to her car without a second thought? It was strange. You'd think the heartbreak would crush me, but instead, I felt something else, release. That final thread I'd been clinging to, that maybe, just maybe, they'd show up for me, snapped. I realized I didn't have to keep waiting by the door like some forgotten pet. They had made their choice loud and clear. Claire noticed the shift in me the next morning. She walked in, her hair a little frizzy from the rain, carrying a tray. With breakfast, I hardly touched. She said, "You look different today." I smiled, though my lips were cracked. Maybe I finally see things for what they are. She tilted her head, cautious but curious. "And what's that?" "That family isn't always blood." She didn't say anything right away, just pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat, the tray aside. Then she reached for my hand. No hesitation, no pity, just steady warmth. "You're right," she said softly. "Sometimes family is who shows up when it matters." Her words clung to me like balm. That moment felt more genuine, more filled with love than anything I'd gotten from my own children in years. The lawyer had filed the changes to my will. Everything, my home, my savings, the investments I'd scraped together, even my late wife's jewelry, was now listed under Claire's name. I asked him to keep it quiet. I wanted it sealed until the day came. I wanted my children to sit in that office, smug and expectant, and watch as their inheritance vanished right before their eyes. And though some might call that cruel, tell me, what's crueler? A father leaving his wealth to the one person who cared for him, or children abandoning the man who raised them while he lay dying? The days dragged on, but Claire made them bearable. She told me stories about her little boy, about how he loved dinosaurs and wanted to be an astronaut. She talked about her long shifts, how she sometimes skipped lunch because another patient needed her more. She never complained, though I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. And every time she came into my room, she still smiled. One night I asked her, "Why do you do this? Why give so much of yourself to people like me?" She laughed gently. "Because someday I'll be old and in a bed like this, and I hope someone will treat me the way I treat you." Her answer hit me hard. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about obligation. It was about humanity, the kind my children had forgotten somewhere along the way. But don't mistake my quiet reflections for peace. No, the bitterness still gnawed at me. It came back especially strong one afternoon when Michael finally called. I had to double-check the number on the screen because it felt so rare it almost shocked me. "Dad," he said, his voice clipped, hurried, like he was already late for something. "Michael," I answered, trying not to let my voice shake. "It's good to hear from you. Yeah, listen, I heard from Emily you're not doing great. I'm sorry about that, but I'm slammed with work. I can't just fly out right now." I closed my eyes. There it was again, the excuse. Work, always work. I'm not asking you to fly out, I said, fighting the bitterness in my tone. "I'm asking you to care." There was silence. Then he said, almost annoyed, "You know I care. I just can't drop everything. When things settle down, maybe I'll visit. When things settle down, as if death waits until your calendar clears." I wanted to scream at him, to tell him he'd regret every second of his absence. But I didn't. Instead, I just said, "I hope you find the time before it's too late." He didn't respond, just mumbled something about calling again soon, though I knew he wouldn't. After the call ended, Claire walked in to check my vitals. She saw the look on my face and asked if everything was okay. I wanted to lie, but instead I told her the truth. I told her what Michael had said. She frowned. Not the kind of frown you give when you're judging, but the kind that comes from heartbreak on someone else's behalf. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I shrugged. "Don't be. I've already buried the hope they'll change." But deep down, her sympathy did something to me. It reminded me that I wasn't crazy for feeling hurt, that my pain wasn't an overreaction. I wasn't asking for the world. I was asking for the bare minimum for my children to stand beside me while I faded And since they wouldn't, I decided something in that moment. If I couldn't have their presence, then I'd leave them with absence. Not just the absence of my love, but the absence of everything they expected to inherit. That night, as Claire tucked the blanket around me, I whispered under my breath, "You have no idea what's coming." Because when that day arrived, the will was read my children would finally learn what it meant to lose someone, not just by death, but by choice. The more time I spent in that hospital, the more the days bled together. Morning and night didn't mean much anymore. The beeping machines and fluorescent lights made everything feel the same. But there was one constant I began to rely on: Claire. She was always there, not just to check my vitals or adjust in 4, but to sit with me, to talk when I needed words, and to stay silent when I didn't. There were moments she reminded me so much of my late wife, Margaret, that it hurt. The way she smoothed the wrinkles out of the blanket without thinking. The way she made me drink water even when I didn't want to. Margaret used to do those little things. The quiet acts of love you don't realize are priceless until no one is doing them anymore. My children should have been the ones picking up that mantle. But instead, it was a stranger. I began telling Claire stories about the kids when they were little, about Margaret, about the old house that was filled with laughter once upon a time. I watched her listen, really listen, her eyes soft and present, as though she understood that I wasn't just recounting memories. I was trying to remind myself that once, I was more than a patient in a bed. One evening, I shared a memory that still feels like it belongs to another life. Michael was 10 years old, and his baseball team had made it to the finals. He was so nervous he could barely sleep. I remember kneeling beside his bed, telling him, "No matter what happens out there, I'll be proud of you." He won the game, hit the ball so hard it soared into the outfield, and when he rounded the bases, he looked straight into the stand straight at me. That smile, that glow in his eyes. It was the kind of moment you think will sustain you forever. But here I was, decades later, and my son couldn't even pick up the phone without treating me like an inconvenience. When I finished telling the story, Claire asked quietly, "Do you think he remembers that day?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe that memory lived in him the way it still lived in me. But all I could do was shrug. If he does, it doesn't mean much anymore. That answer weighed on me. I used to believe memories bound us, that the love we poured into our children would always tether them back to us somehow. But love is only as strong as the effort both sides are willing to put in. And my kids had cut the rope long ago. Still, there was a part of me that hoped they might prove me wrong. One morning, I asked Claire if she'd mind dialing Emily's number for me. My hands were shaking too much to press the buttons. She obliged, handed me the phone, and gave me a reassuring smile as she left the room to give me privacy. Emily answered, her voice flat. "Dad, I'm in the middle of something. Can this wait?" I swallowed hard. "It won't take long. I just wanted to hear your voice." A sigh crackled through the receiver. "I really can't talk right now. I'll call you later, okay?" But I knew she wouldn't. She hadn't before, and she wouldn't now. "Emily," I said quickly, desperate to keep her from hanging up, "I don't know how much time I have left." There was a pause. For a moment, I thought maybe she'd soften. Maybe she'd say she'd come see me. But instead, her tone sharpened. "Don't talk like that. You're going to be fine. Look, I'll check in later. I promise." And then the line went dead. I sat there with the phone heavy in my hand, tears stinging my eyes. I wasn't angry this time. I was hollow. My own daughter couldn't spare 5 minutes for a dying man. She couldn't look past her own life long. Enough to step into mine. When Claire returned, she didn't ask what Emily said. She just saw my face and knew. Without a word, she pulled her chair closer, rested her hand over mine, and let me sit with the silence. That was the moment I knew I'd made the right decision about the will. It wasn't a matter of punishment anymore. It was justice. Why should people who couldn't bother to love me in life get to benefit from me in death? Over the next weeks, my health declined further. Breathing became harder, the pain sharper. I could see the worry in Claire's eyes, though she tried to hide it. One night, when the ward was quiet, she finally broke the silence. "You ever regret it, being a father?" The question startled me. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized she wasn't asking just for me. She was asking for herself, for the son she was raising alone. I thought about it long and hard. "I don't regret loving them," I said finally. "I regret believing that love would be enough to bring them back when I needed them." She nodded, as though she understood. Maybe she did. That night, I dreamed of Margaret. She was standing in the garden, wearing that yellow dress she loved, her hands brushing through the lavender. She looked at me and whispered, "It's okay to let go." When I woke up, I knew what I had to do. It wasn't enough to quietly leave everything. To Claire, I had to make sure my children faced what they had done, or rather, what they had failed to do not. And so, with the lawyer's help, I wrote a letter. One that would be read aloud with the will. Every word carried the weight of years of neglect. Every sentence a mirror held up to their indifference. It wasn't angry. It wasn't vengeful. It was the truth. And the truth was going to cut deeper than any punishment I could dream of. The letter was the hardest thing I ever wrote. Not because I didn't know what to say, the words came pouring out of me like water from a cracked dam. No, what made it hard was knowing they'd hear every syllable. For once, they couldn't talk over me, couldn't brush me off with excuses, couldn't silence me with their sighs and impatience. My voice would linger in that lawyer's office long after I was gone. I started the letter the way I always wished our conversations would go. "Dear Emily and Michael, I hope you're well." Simple, plain. But it was the last gentle thing I wrote. The rest was raw. I told them about the nights I sat in that hospital bed waiting for them, the phone calls that ended too quickly, the way their absence had broken me more than the disease ever could. "You treated me," I wrote, "like I was already dead. You came for paperwork, for updates, for the numbers in my bank account, but not once did you come for me." I described Claire, though not by name. I called her the one who stayed when you couldn't be bothered. I wanted them to feel the sting of those words, wanted them to picture the stranger who had done their job as children. And then, in one final stroke, I told them the truth, that my estate, every piece of it, would be left to her. Not to punish them, but because she had shown me love when they had none left to give. I ended it with a sentence I knew would haunt them. "You taught me in life that I wasn't worth your time. I hope in death you learn what it feels like to be left with nothing." When I finished dictating it to the lawyer, my hands too weak to write for long, he looked at me like he wasn't sure if I was a broken man, or the coldest one he'd ever met. I didn't care. I wasn't writing it for him. That night, I felt lighter. Almost free. Claire noticed the difference immediately. "You look peaceful," she said, adjusting the pillows behind me. I've said what I needed to say, I told her. She gave me a curious smile. "To your kids?" "In a way." She didn't press. That was another thing about her. She never pushed where she wasn't wanted. She gave me space, but she was always there when I was ready to fill it. As my health deteriorated further, I began to wonder if my children suspected. Emily called once more, not to check in, but to ask about a piece of jewelry Margaret had left behind, a necklace she'd always admired. She tried to frame it as sentimentality, but her voice gave her away. She wanted it for herself, not as a memory of her mother, but as an asset. I told her gently, "That necklace isn't yours. She grew defensive, her voice sharp. What do you mean? It isn't mine. You always said Mom wanted me to have it. She wanted you to earn it. I snapped before I could stop myself. The line went quiet. Earn it? She repeated, incredulous. Yes. I said, softer now, but still firm. By being the kind of daughter she raised you to be. By standing by your family, even when it's hard. She gave you love, Emily. But somewhere along the way, you decided her love, my love, it wasn't enough unless it came with a price tag. The silence that followed told me everything. She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. She just hung up. That was the last time we spoke. Michael, meanwhile, went silent altogether. Maybe he thought ignoring the situation would make it easier. Maybe he assumed I'd forgive him by default, the way I always had. He didn't realize this time was different. This time, forgiveness wasn't on the table. Claire noticed how I stopped asking about them. You've let them go, she said one afternoon as she fluffed my pillow. I nodded. They let go first. I'm just catching up. Her eyes softened, full of that quiet empathy that made her so different. She didn't try to talk me out of it, didn't insist I give them another chance. She simply sat there, holding my hand, and for the first time in years, I felt like someone understood me completely. The doctor came in later, giving me that look doctors give when they've stopped trying to find the right words. He told me my time was running short. I thanked him, oddly enough, because when you've been abandoned by the people who should love you most, certainty even of death feels kinder than false hope. That night, I asked Claire to stay a little longer. She told me about her son again, how he'd asked when she'd be home, how she hated missing bedtime stories. She said she felt guilty sometimes, splitting herself between her patients and her own child. Don't feel guilty, I told her. One day, he'll understand. He'll remember you showed up, even when you were tired, even when you had nothing left to give. That's what love is. Her eyes shimmered in the dim light, and she squeezed my hand. And as I drifted off to sleep, I realized something that made my heart ache and heal at the same time. Claire wasn't just my nurse. She had become the daughter I always wished I had. And that meant when the will was finally read, and Emily and Michael sat there in stunned silence, they wouldn't just be losing an inheritance. They'd be losing me to someone who had already earned the title of family. The day the end finally came, it was quieter than I expected. No dramatic beeping of machines, no frantic doctors rushing in, just a soft fading, like a candle slowly burning down to nothing. I remember the way the morning light spilled across the floor of the hospital room, how Claire's hand was wrapped around mine. She was talking in that calm, soothing way she had, even though I could barely make out the words. You're not alone, she whispered. I'm right here. And she was. Not Emily, not Michael, not the children I raised, the ones I thought would be my comfort in old age. It was Claire, the woman who had no obligation to me, who chose to show up when they wouldn't. I left this world with her voice in my ears. And strangely, it felt right that the lawyer handled everything after that. I had instructed him to gather Emily and Michael in his office for the reading of the will. From what I was told later, they both arrived. In expensive clothes, carrying the weight of entitlement like armor. They weren't grieving. They weren't even pretending. They were there to collect. I can almost picture it Emily, sitting with her arms crossed, tapping her manicured nails against the chair, impatient for her windfall. Michael, stiff-backed, trying to look serious and businesslike, though I know he was already calculating what to do with his share. The lawyer opened the folder, adjusted his glasses, and began to read. Your father asked me to deliver this message personally, he said, and then he began my letter. I wish I could have seen their faces when the words sank in. I wish I could have watched Emily's confident smirk falter, Michael's composure crack. I imagine Emily shifted in her seat, her cheeks flushing with anger as she realized the money wasn't coming. I imagine Michael leaned forward, as though hearing the words more carefully might change their meaning. But the words didn't change. They cut, they burned. They revealed the truth they had ignored for too long, that their father had seen them, not as the loving children they should have been, but as opportunists who abandoned him when it mattered most. And then came the final blow, the announcement that everything, all the property, the savings, the possessions, was left to Claire. The nurse. I could almost hear Emily's outburst. She would have slammed her hand on the desk, her voice rising, accusing the lawyer of lying, demanding proof. Michael, quieter but no less furious, would have asked if the will could be contested, if there was some way to undo it. But the lawyer was firm. My decision was legal, binding, airtight. And then, as I had instructed, he read the final lines of my letter. You weren't there when I needed you. Claire was. Family is not blood, it is love, and you showed me none. I hope you both take this lesson with you. Money cannot replace presence, and entitlement is no substitute for love. Those words weren't written to hurt them, though I know they did. They were written as the truth. Because in the end, what I wanted wasn't revenge, it was clarity. I wanted them to face what they had become. From what the lawyer later told, Claire, Emily stormed out in tears, her voice echoing down the hall as she cursed my name. Michael stayed longer, his face pale, silent, as though the weight of it was only just beginning to hit him. But he left, too, empty-handed. Claire didn't know about the will until the lawyer contacted her. She was stunned, overwhelmed. She told him there must have been a mistake. But when he explained everything, how I had carefully planned it, how I had chosen her, she wept. When she finally visited my grave, she brought her son with her. She stood there quietly, tears streaking her face, and whispered, "Thank you. I promise I'll honor this." Her boy placed a small toy dinosaur on the headstone, his innocent gift to a man he'd never really known. And in that moment, I felt at peace. Because even though my own children had turned away, someone else had stepped forward. Someone who understood that love is measured not in words, but in presence. Emily and Michael were left with nothing but regret. And Claire, the one who sat by my side, who held my hand through the storms, was left with everything. Not just the house, the money, or the possessions. She was left with my gratitude, my trust, my legacy, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. Story 2. I was told to keep quiet at the will reading. Then the lawyer handed me the real document. I sat in that suffocating mahogany-paneled room with my hands folded so tightly in my lap that the edges of my nails left little crescent-shaped marks in my palms. My brother, Paul, leaned back in his chair like he was the king of the world, smug and comfortable, already imagining himself walking through our late father's house with a glass of whiskey in hand, talking about what he was going to renovate first. My sister-in-law adjusted her pearl necklace and glanced at me as though I was a piece of furniture she wished wasn't in the room. And then there was me sitting in silence because Paul had whispered to me on the way in, "Just keep quiet. Don't make this harder than it has to be." It was a warning more than a suggestion. He'd always spoken to me that way, like I was some fragile inconvenience who should just obey and not disrupt the narrative he built around himself. I swallowed the lump in my throat because I already knew what was coming. Or at least, I thought I did. The lawyer cleared his throat, his voice steady but tired. He'd clearly done this 100 times before, but to me, it felt like the world was shifting under my chair. He began reading the will, My father's words, his last instructions, and everything in me clenched. My father wasn't a sentimental man, but he had a certain sense of justice. He didn't believe in coddling anyone, but he also wasn't cruel, which is why it didn't make sense when the words rolled out of the lawyer's mouth and landed like a punch in my stomach. To my eldest son, Paul, I leave the family home, the savings account, and the lake property. I barely heard the rest. It was like a roar filled my ears, the kind of static that makes your pulse race. Paul smirked and nudged his wife as though he'd just been crowned. The lawyer's voice droned on, mentioning cousins, charitable donations, and small heirlooms to extended family. But there was nothing, absolutely nothing about me. Not even a token mention. Not a watch, not a framed photograph, not even a polite sentence. I sat frozen, my face burning with humiliation, feeling every pair of eyes in the room flicker toward me for a fraction of a second, then back away. The silence around my absence in the will was louder than anything else. My father had written me out completely. Paul leaned closer, just enough so only I could hear. "Told you," he muttered. "Best to just keep quiet." The audacity, the cruelty. It wasn't enough that I'd lost my father, that I was already drowning in grief and unanswered questions about our relationship. Now I was being erased in front of witnesses. But then, just as I was about to shrink into myself and let them walk all over me, the lawyer cleared his throat again. His tone changed. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a sealed envelope, and said, "And now, there is an addendum. Mr. Warren requested this be delivered in person." Paul frowned. His wife shifted in her chair, uncomfortable for the first time all afternoon. And me? My heart jolted in my chest, so violently I thought everyone could hear it. The lawyer broke the seal, unfolded the crisp papers, and looked directly at me before he began reading. But before I tell you what was in that document, you need to understand something. My father wasn't a simple man. He built walls around himself and around us, his children. Growing up, Paul was the golden child, the one my father groomed to take over his business and carry the family legacy. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one, the disappointment in his eyes, the reminder of my mother who had left us when I was 12. My father never forgave her for leaving, and I think, in his own twisted way, he transferred some of that bitterness onto me. I wasn't a troublemaker. I didn't rebel. I just didn't fit the mold. I loved books instead of balance sheets. I worked part-time jobs in high school, not because I needed to, but because I liked the independence. When I told him I wanted to study literature instead of business, he looked at me like I had spat in his face. From that point on, Paul became his shadow, his partner, his pride, and I became the ghost in the corner of the room. But here's the part no one ever seemed to remember. I was the one who stayed when my father got sick. Paul visited when it was convenient, swooping in to play the doting son in front of the nurses. But I was the one who learned how to change 4 bags, how to cook meals he could actually swallow, how to sleep in a chair just to be there when he woke in pain. I was the one who sat with him when he finally admitted, late one night, that he was scared to die. And for the first time in my life, he let his guard down. He told me stories he had never told Paul. He admitted mistakes. He apologized, not outright, not in the way I wanted, but enough that I believed there was something real between us, Doc. So when the lawyer read that first will, the one that erased me completely. My grief twisted into something sharp and sour. How could he look me in the eye those last months and then leave me nothing? How could he pretend those nights meant nothing? The lawyer unfolded the new papers with deliberate care, his eyes scanning the room before landing on me again. I could feel Paul's stare boring into my temple, hot with suspicion. The room was so quiet, I swear I heard the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. This document, the lawyer began slowly, was signed 3 weeks before Mr. Warren's passing. It supersedes the previous will. Paul straightened. In his chair, his confidence faltering for the first time. My chest tightened as the lawyer's words filled the room, changing everything I thought I knew about my father, my family, and the future we were about to inherit or lose. The lawyer's voice was steady, almost too calm, like he knew exactly how explosive the words he was about to read would be. He adjusted his glasses and began. To my eldest son, Paul Warren, I leave. He paused for a moment, and Paul's lips curled into that familiar, arrogant grin. But then the lawyer continued, nothing of my estate. The silence that followed was absolute. I heard the faint hum of the air conditioner, the rustle of fabric as Paul's wife shifted in, her chair and my own pulse pounding in my ears. Paul's face fell, his grin collapsing into confusion, then outrage. What? Paul barked, sitting forward so aggressively, his chair squealed against the floor. That's impossible. This must be some kind of mistake. My father wouldn't. But the lawyer held up a hand, his composure unshaken. This is the most recent legally binding document. Please allow me to finish. Paul's wife reached for his arm, whispering something sharp under her breath, but Paul shook her off. His eyes, wide and bloodshot, darted between me and the lawyer like he couldn't decide who to blame. The lawyer cleared his throat and kept reading. To my son who sat with me, who did not abandon me in the darkest hours, who showed me compassion when I had shown him so little in life, I leave the family home, the lake property, the business assets, and the remainder of my estate. To him, I leave everything. My breath caught. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. The words hung in the air like a lightning strike, electrifying and dangerous. I blinked at the lawyer, then at the papers in his hand, then back at Paul, whose mouth hung open in disbelief. Everything? Paul's voice cracked. He slammed his palm against the table, so hard that the coffee cups rattled. No, this is forged. Dad would never do this. He promised me everything. The lawyer, unflinching, folded the papers carefully and set them down on the polished oak table. I assure you, Mr. Warren, this is no forgery. Your father signed this in my office, in the presence of 2 witnesses, and it has been notarized. His instructions were very clear. Paul's face turned crimson, veins rising in his neck. You think I'm going to sit here and let this nobody steal what I built with Dad? He was grooming me to take over the business. I worked with him for years. He barely even spoke to my brother until the end. And now you're telling me he gets everything? I wanted to speak, to defend myself, but the words lodged in my throat. I sat frozen, hands trembling, staring at the lawyer as though he'd just pulled the ground out from under all of us. Paul wasn't entirely wrong. For most of my life, my father and I had been distant, bordering on estranged. But in those final months, something had shifted. It wasn't just about caretaking. It was about finally being seen. For once, I hadn't been invisible. And apparently, my father had noticed more than Paul realized. Paul stood, towering over the table, pointing a shaking finger at me. You manipulated him. That's what this is. You poisoned his mind when he was weak. That's elder abuse. That's fraud. You think you can just waltz in after years of doing nothing and take everything from me? Sit down, Mr. Warren, the lawyer said sharply. His tone carried the authority of someone who had seen dozens of families tear themselves apart in this very room. If you wish to contest the will, you may pursue that in court, but your father's wishes are legally sound. This is not up for debate here. Paul didn't sit. He glared at me with a hatred I had never seen before. His chest heaving, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. His wife tugged at his sleeve again, her own face pale with fury and fear. My stomach churned. This wasn't the triumph it might have sounded like on paper. This wasn't the moment I stood victorious. It was messy, ugly, and dangerous. Because if there was one thing I knew about Paul, it was that he didn't take losing well. The lawyer pushed the envelope toward me, his eyes softening slightly. This is your copy, he said. Your father also left you a letter. It's inside. My hands shook as I reached for it, the weight of the paper heavier than it should have been. Paul's eyes followed my every movement, rage simmering just beneath the surface. I tucked the envelope against my chest, my mind spinning. A letter, my father's handwriting, his final words to me. Did it explain everything? Did it apologize? Did it justify the decision that was now ripping our family apart at the seams? Paul slammed his fists against the table one last time and stormed toward the door, his wife scrambling after him. Just before he left, he turned and hissed, "This isn't over." Not by a long shot. The door slammed so hard the walls shook, leaving me in silence with the lawyer. I stared down at the envelope in my hands, the edges digging into my palms, and felt the air shift around me, because I knew Paul was right about one thing. This wasn't over, not even close. I sat there long after Paul stormed out, clutching the envelope as though it might vanish if I loosened my grip. The lawyer busied himself with gathering documents, but I barely noticed. My mind was a storm of conflicting emotions relief, confusion, fear, even guilt. I finally found my voice, though it came out hoarse. Why? Why did he do this? I asked, not really expecting an answer. The lawyer paused, looked at me over the rim of his glasses, and sighed. I can't speak to what was in your father's heart, but I can tell you he was very clear. He knew this would cause conflict, but he was adamant. He wanted you to have it all. All. The word felt foreign, like it didn't belong to me. For years, I had lived in Paul's shadow, treated like a background character in my own family. And now, suddenly, I was the heir to everything my father had built. The lawyer slid a smaller sealed envelope toward me. This is the letter he asked me to give you personally. I suggest you read it when you're ready. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. When I finally left the office, the late afternoon sun hit me square in the face. The world outside looked the same, cars honking, people rushing down sidewalks, life moving on as though nothing had happened. But for me, everything had shifted. I tucked the envelope into my jacket pocket, feeling its weight like a secret. Burning against my chest. Paul was waiting. He leaned against his car across the street, his wife standing stiffly beside him. His arms were crossed, his eyes narrowed. When he saw me, he pushed off the car and marched over. "You think this is some kind of victory?" He spat, stopping just inches from me. "You think you've won? Dad and I built that business together. I put in the years, the sweat, the sacrifice. And you swoop in at the end, play nurse for a few months. And now you think you're entitled to it all? No, not happening." His voice was venom, each word dripping with years of resentment I hadn't realized ran so deep. "I didn't ask for this," I said quietly, forcing myself to meet his glare. "I didn't even know about it until today." Paul laughed bitterly. "Oh, save the innocent act. You knew exactly what you were doing. You wormed your way into Dad's head when he was weak, and you convinced him to screw me over. But you're not going to get away with it." His wife touched his arm, murmuring his name, but he shook her off. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "You have no idea what you've just started." Then he turned sharply, climbed into his car, and sped away, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with my heart pounding. I drove home in silence, the letter still unopened. In my pocket. Every stoplight, every turn, every bump in the road felt surreal, like I was floating through someone else's life. I pulled into my driveway, sat in the car for several long minutes, and finally forced myself to open the envelope. The handwriting hit me first. Bold, deliberate strokes that I hadn't seen since I was a child, and he used to leave notes on the fridge. My throat tightened as I began to read. "Son." Just that word made my eyes sting. My father had never called me that in writing before. "I know you'll be shocked by what you heard today. You're probably confused, maybe even angry. But I want you to understand something. I made mistakes with you. I know I pushed you away, favored your brother, and left you feeling unseen. That was my failure, not yours. When your mother left, I buried myself in building something I thought would keep the family strong, and in the process, I lost sight of what really mattered. I didn't see you for who you were. I only saw what you weren't. And that is my greatest regret." I had to stop reading for a moment, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. My father had never been this vulnerable, not once in my entire life. I kept reading. When I got sick, I expected Paul to step up the way I always believed he would, but he didn't. He visited when it was convenient, but it was you who stayed. You who cared for me without asking for anything in return. You showed me a kind of love I never gave back, and I'll never be able to thank you enough for that. I want you to have everything I built, not because of the business or the money, but because I know you'll honor it. You'll treat it with the heart and decency it deserves. Don't let Paul's anger consume you. Don't become me. Be better. Live your life the way you want, not the way I tried to force you." The letter ended simply. "I'm proud of you. I just wish I'd told you sooner, Dad." I sat there, clutching the pages, my chest heaving. I didn't realize how badly I needed those words until I had them in my hands. For years, I had carried the weight of not being enough. And now, too late, he had finally told me the truth. The peace those words gave me was short-lived, because as much as they healed something deep inside me, they also lit a fire under Paul. I knew him. He wouldn't let this go. He would fight, manipulate, Skeen do whatever it took to claw back what he believed was his. I couldn't shake the sinking feeling that my father's last attempt to make things right had just set the stage for a war. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating on the nightstand. Dozens of notifications lit up the screen, missed calls from Paul, angry texts, even voicemails. My stomach twisted before I even unlocked it. The first message I opened was short, almost a growl in text form. "You're going to regret this." Another one followed a minute later. "You think you can steal what I earned? Lawyers can be bought. Judges can be swayed. You're nothing without me." I scrolled further. The messages grew less coherent, as if he had been drinking. "You manipulated him. You poisoned his mind. This is fraud, and I'll prove it." My hand trembled as I set the phone down. Paul had always been controlling, but this was different. This was desperation, the kind that could push him to dangerous places. Later that day, I got a call from the lawyer's office. His voice was calm, professional, but I could hear the weariness in his tone. "Mr. Warren, I want to prepare you. Your brother has already contacted us, threatening to contest the will. Legally speaking, he has little ground, but that won't stop him from dragging this through court if he chooses." I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers into my forehead. How long would something like that take? "Months, sometimes years," he replied. "It depends on how determined he is." Of course, Paul would be determined. He wasn't just fighting for money. He was fighting for his pride, for the story he had told himself his whole life, that he was the chosen son, the heir, the one who deserved everything. Losing that identity would destroy him. That evening, I drove to the family home, the house my father had left me, the house Paul had assumed would be his. Unlocking the door felt surreal. The place smelled faintly of cedar and old books. The furniture was exactly as it had been the last time I visited. The grandfather clock ticking softly in the corner. I wandered from room to room, touching the backs of chairs, the cold marble of the fireplace mantel, the familiar grooves. In the wooden banister, memories swirled both good and bad. My father's voice echoing through the halls, stern and commanding. Paul and I racing up the stairs as kids, before the rift between us grew into something unbridgeable. I ended up in my father's study. The heavy oak desk still held stacks of papers, a brass lamp, and a photo of Paul and me as children. We were maybe 8 and 10, both smiling, both looking like the world hadn't yet divided us. My chest ached as I picked it up. There was another envelope on the desk, one I hadn't noticed before. My name was scrawled across it in my father's hand. My pulse quickened as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just a few sentences. "If you're reading this, it means you found your way back here. There are things I never wanted Paul to know. Things that will help you understand why I did what I did. Look, in the bottom drawer." My fingers fumbled as I pulled open the bottom drawer of the desk. At first, all I saw were old tax files and ledgers, but tucked beneath them was a small locked box. The kind of box people use to keep secrets, not valuables. I set it on the desk, my hands trembling. There was no key, but after rummaging through the drawers, I found a small one taped to the underside of the desk. My father's handwriting beside. It for him. The lock clicked open, and inside were letters, dozens of them, some yellowed with age, others more recent. My mother's handwriting got my breath caught. She had written to him, to me, to us. All these years, I had believed she had left without looking back. My father had always spoken of her like she was a ghost who had abandoned us, someone unworthy of even a mention. But here were letters, preserved, hidden away where only he or now I could see them. The first one I unfolded was dated just months after she left. I know you hate me for leaving, but I need you to understand. I couldn't survive in that house anymore. You shut me out. You shut the children out, and I was drowning. Please tell them I love them. Please don't turn them against me. My knees went weak. I sank into the chair, my eyes scanning line after line. Another letter, years later. I wanted to come back for his birthday, but you told me it wasn't a good idea. I still have the gift wrapped, waiting. Please let me see him. He's my son. Tears blurred my vision. My mother had tried. She had reached out again and again, but my father had kept her at arm's length, shielding us from the truth. Shielding me. Shielding Paul. The most recent letter was dated 2 years before my father died. If you're still reading these, it means you've never told him. He deserves to know I never stopped loving him. He deserves to know the truth. I sat in stunned silence, clutching the letter as the realization sank in. My entire childhood, my resentment, my loneliness, the hollow feeling of abandonment, it had all been built on a lie that my father had cut her out, and by extension, cut me off from her. He had buried her existence beneath anger and pride, and in doing so, he had turned me into a ghost in my own life. And now, through these letters, I finally had proof. Proof that Paul didn't know. Proof that my father had carried secrets to his grave. And proof that my inheritance was more than just property and money. It was the truth itself. But I also knew one thing with chilling certainty. If Paul ever discovered these letters, he would burn them before he let me use them. I sat in that study for hours. The letters spread out across the desk like fragments of a story. I was only now realizing I'd been living in the dark. Each page felt like a window into a life I'd been denied. My mother hadn't vanished into the night without a word. She had fought, pleaded, begged to stay connected. And my father, my proud, stubborn father, had been the wall that kept her out. It was like a second death. First, I had lost her to absence, and now I was losing her again to the truth. But mixed in with the grief was something else. Fury. Fury at my father for stealing that from me, for letting me grow up believing I wasn't worth her effort. Fury at Paul for parroting Dad's bitterness all these years, cementing my role as the forgotten child. I gathered the letters back into the box, hands trembling, and locked it again. I knew instinctively I couldn't leave them lying around, not with Paul sniffing for weaknesses like a wolf on the scent of blood. These letters weren't just pieces of paper. They were dynamite. The next day, as if to confirm my fears, Paul showed up unannounced. I heard his car before I saw him, the tires crunching up the gravel driveway like an approaching storm. He didn't knock. He just walked in, the door slamming against the wall. "This is still my house," he sneered, his voice low but shaking with rage. I stood in the foyer, my heart hammering, the key to the lockbox still in my pocket. "No, Paul," I said quietly. "It's not anymore." He laughed bitterly. "You think a piece of paper makes you king? You're out of your depth. Dad built all of this with me. You can wave around that letter and those documents all. You want, but you don't deserve it. You don't even know how to run the business. He wasn't wrong about that part. The logistics of my father's company were a mystery to me. I'd spent my life in books, not balance sheets. But his words only made me straighten my spine. Maybe I don't, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. But Dad trusted me to figure it out. And he trusted me more than he trusted you. That hit him like a slap. His face twisted, and for a moment, I thought he might actually hit me. His fists clenched at his sides, his breathing ragged. His wife appeared in the doorway behind him, her eyes wide with silent warning. She grabbed his arm, but he shook her off. This isn't finished, he growled, stepping closer until we were eye to eye. I'm going to tear you apart in court, and when I'm done, you'll wish you'd never been born. I held his gaze, forcing myself not to flinch. You've already tried to erase me once, Paul. Didn't work then. Won't work now. For a moment, it was just the two of us locked in that stare. Decades of resentment and rivalry boiling between us. Then, with a sound somewhere between a grunt and a roar, he turned on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled dot when the house was finally quiet again. I leaned against the wall, my knees weak. Paul wasn't bluffing. He would drag me into court, smear my name, twist the story until I was the villain. And without proof, without something solid, I might lose everything my father had finally, belatedly given me. That's when it hit. Me, the letters, they weren't just personal. They were evidence. Proof that my father had lied, controlled, and manipulated the story of our family. Proof that could explain why he had disinherited Paul and entrusted me instead. But proof could also destroy me. If I revealed them, I'd be exposing my father's ugliest secrets. I'd be dismantling the image of the man Paul worshipped, the man the community respected, the man I had just begun to forgive. That night, I spread the letters out again, reading until my eyes blurred. One in particular stopped me cold, Dot. It was dated only a year before my father's death. My mother's handwriting was shaky but urgent. I know I've said this before, but I'll say it again. I never stopped loving both of them. If Paul hates me, that's because of you. If he resents his brother, that's because of you. You've played us all against each other for so long. I don't know if they'll ever forgive you. But if there's any chance left, let them see the truth. Don't bury it with you. Don't let my boys live the rest of their lives as strangers. Her words hit me harder than anything in my father's will or his final letter. She had seen it all years before the end. She had begged him not to let us turn into enemies, and he had ignored her. Now here we were, exactly as she'd predicted, two brothers standing on opposite sides of a war we never asked for. I sat back in the chair, the letter trembling in my hands, and whispered into the empty study. What the hell am I supposed to do with this? Because one thing was clear. Those letters could either save me or destroy us all. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Paul's face twisted with rage or my mother's handwriting swimming across the page. By morning, my body felt heavy, like I'd spent the night fighting invisible battles. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the lockbox. Its small brass clasp gleamed in the sunlight, mocking me. Inside were truths powerful enough to rewrite decades of pain, but at what cost? As I debated with myself, the doorbell rang. My heart jumped. I half expected Paul, fists clenched, demanding entry. But when I opened the door, it wasn't him, Dot. It was her, Dot, my mother. She stood there, older than I remembered, but unmistakably her. Her hair was silver now, pulled back in a neat bun. Her eyes, though tired, were alive, familiar in a way that sent a shock straight through my chest. "Hello, sweetheart," she said softly. Her voice trembled, like she wasn't sure she had the right to use that word anymore. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself, my mind racing. She was real. After all the letters, after all the lies, she was standing on my doorstep. How? My voice cracked. I swallowed hard. How did you? She held up a small envelope. Your father sent me a letter before he passed. Told me he'd left something for you. Told me maybe it was finally time. I stepped aside, numb, and let her in. She walked cautiously, her eyes sweeping over the house, like a ghost returning to the scene of her own death. We sat in the living room, the air so thick with unspoken words, it felt suffocating. Finally, I pushed the lockbox onto the coffee table. I found these, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her face crumpled the moment she saw it. She reached out with trembling hands, touching the box like it was sacred. When I opened it and spread the letters across the table, tears streamed down her cheeks. He kept them, she whispered. After everything, he still kept them. I stared at her, anger and longing warring inside me. Why didn't you fight harder? Why didn't you come back? Her eyes filled with anguish. I did fight. I begged him. I wrote every week. I called, but he changed the numbers. He told me if I tried to see you, he'd make sure you hated me. And I believed him because I saw how much power he had over you boys. I thought, maybe when you were older, you'd find me yourself. But I was too scared, too ashamed. Her words pierced something deep in me. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to rage about the years I had lost, the birthday she'd missed, the empty seat at every milestone. But another part of me, the child who had cried himself to sleep wondering why his mother didn't love him, just wanted to collapse into her arms. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. Why now? She looked down at her lap, twisting the tissue in her hands. Because your father finally told me he'd made it right, that he'd given you what was yours. He said you'd need me, that Paul would come after you, and you couldn't. Fight him alone. The mention of Paul made my stomach clench. As if summoned by her words, my phone buzzed on the table. A new message from him flashed across the screen. Lawyer or no lawyer, I'll burn this house to the ground before I let you take it. My mother's eyes caught the message. She inhaled sharply, covering her mouth with her hand. He's just like your father, she whispered. Pride before everything. He'll destroy you if he can. I clenched my fists. Then I need to fight back with the truth. She looked up, her eyes wide with fear. The letters? I nodded. If the court sees these, if the world sees these, it'll explain everything. Why Dad changed the will. Why Paul can't be trusted. It won't just be my word against his. But she shook her head violently, gripping my arm. No, if you expose those letters, you'll drag all of us through the mud. People will say I abandoned you. They'll say your father was a liar. Paul will turn it into a circus. Is that what you want your life to be? A headline about family. A trail? Her words rattled me. Because she was right, it wouldn't be clean. It wouldn't be justice neatly served on a silver platter. It would be messy, brutal, public. I sat back, torn in two. On one side, my mother begging me to protect the fragile remnants of our family's dignity. On the other, Paul's threats hanging over me like a storm cloud, ready to strike. I looked at her and whispered, "Then what am I supposed to do?" She leaned closer, her voice trembling but resolute. "You have to decide what matters more, protecting the truth or protecting yourself. But whatever you do, you cannot let Paul win. He'll devour you." Her words settled into my bones like a prophecy, because I knew no matter what choice I made to fight, with Paul had only just begun. The next week blurred into a haze of court papers, hushed conversations, and sleepless nights. Paul had wasted no time. His lawyer filed a formal challenge to the will, claiming undue influence, that Dad must have been coerced, manipulated, or mentally unfit when he made me the sole beneficiary. It was vicious. Every sentence dripped with poison, painting me as some schemer who preyed on a dying man. My brother, my own blood, was trying to brand me as a parasite. I sat in the lawyer's office with the file open in front of me, my stomach twisting. This is insane. Dad made his choice. My lawyer, an older man named Hendricks with deep lines etched into his face, sighed and tapped the file. It doesn't matter what's true. What matters is what we can prove. And right now, Paul has money, resources, and no conscience. He'll drag this through the courts for years if he can. That night, I sat with my mother at the kitchen table, the lockbox between us like a ticking bomb. The letters felt heavier than ever. "Mom," I said, my voice low, "if I use these, it ends." The letters explain everything. Why Dad changed. His mind. Why Paul can't be trusted. It proves the truth. Her face crumpled. She gripped my hand, her knuckles white. "And what happens after, HM? Do you think Paul will just walk away? He'll tear us apart. He'll tell the whole world, 'I left you.' He'll make sure no one ever sees me as anything but a mother who abandoned her child." I squeezed her hand, fighting the lump in my throat. "But it's not the truth. You didn't abandon me. You tried. I know that now." Her eyes glistened with tears. "Knowing it in here," she touched my chest, "is not the same as having the world believe it. Sometimes survival means carrying your truth quietly, not shouting it from rooftops. But survival wasn't enough anymore. Paul wasn't just attacking me. He was dragging Dad's memory through the dirt. The next day, Paul showed up unannounced. He didn't knock. He banged on the door until it rattled in its frame. When I opened it, he shoved a stack of papers in my face. "You think you've won? You haven't won a damn thing," he sneered. "Dad was weak at the end. You manipulated him. Everyone can see it. You stole what's mine." I stared him down. "What's yours?" "Paul, you had everything. Dad's attention, his respect, the company. I never wanted any of it. But Dad left this to me because he finally saw who you really are." His face turned, red, his jaw tightening. "You really think you can hold on to it? I'll bury you in court. I'll make sure you lose everything, including that woman you dragged back into our lives." For a split second, I thought he was bluffing. Then I saw the glint in his eye. He had already started digging into Mom's past. That night, I couldn't. Sit still. I paced the living room, the letters spread out on the coffee table, like soldiers waiting for orders. My mother sat quietly in the armchair, her hands trembling as she sipped cold tea. Finally, I stopped pacing. We can't keep hiding. If Paul wants to drag everything into the light, then fine. But we do it on our terms. Mom's eyes widened. You're going to use them. I nodded slowly. Yes, every last one. She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. Then God help us all. The next morning, I walked into Hendrik's office with the lockbox under my arm. He raised his brows when I set it on his desk. What's this? He asked. I flipped the lid open and spread the letters across the wood. Proof, I said. My voice didn't shake this time. This is why my father changed the will. This is why Paul can't be trusted. This is the truth. Hendrik scanned the first letter, his expression tightening. He read another, then another, until his face softened with something I hadn't seen from him before conviction. He leaned back in his chair and exhaled. This changes everything. And just like that, the war lines were drawn, because I knew once these letters were revealed, there would be no going back. Court was nothing like I'd imagined. I'd thought it would be dignified, quiet, all marble floors, and solemn oaths. Instead, it was a battlefield in suits. Words were weapons, sharpened and flung like knives. Paul sat across the room from me, his lawyer at his side, both smirking as if they already owned the outcome. He looked confident, too confident, like he had already won. But I had the letters. When Hendricks laid the first one on the table, the room seemed to shift. It wasn't just paper, it was Dad's voice echoing back from the grave. The judge adjusted his glasses and read aloud. If you're reading this, it means I've had the courage to tell the truth at last. I love both my sons, but one has proven himself unworthy of trust. Paul, if you're reading this, you know why. You know what you did. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Paul's smirk cracked out. His lawyer jumped up immediately. Objection, Your Honor. These so-called letters are hearsay, irrelevant, inadmissible. But Hendricks was ready. Your Honor, these are signed, dated, and verified in my late client's own hand. They are directly tied to his reasoning for the amended will. This is not hearsay. This is testimony from the deceased. The judge didn't look convinced at first, but as Hendricks stacked letter after letter on the bench, each detailing not only Dad's mistrust of Paul, but also Paul's questionable financial dealings with the company, the weight of the evidence was undeniable. And then came the letter that no one was ready for. The one where Dad wrote about Mom. I cannot undo the pain of the past, but I cannot let lies define it. Paul has spread stories about your mother that are not true. She did not leave because she stopped loving us. She left because she was forced to survive. If the truth ever comes out, I want it to come out in her own words, not his. The room fell silent. My mother, sitting in the back row, lowered her head, her shoulders trembling. Paul leapt to his feet. His voice cracked with rage. This is ridiculous. He was senile. He didn't know what he was writing. That woman, he jabbed. A finger toward Mom. She walked out on us. And now you're telling me we're supposed to believe she's some kind of victim? The judge banged the gavel. Mr. Dalton, sit down. But Paul wasn't finished. He kept shouting, his words unraveling into accusations. About Mom, about me. about how the company should have been his alone. His mask was slipping in front. Of everyone the judge turned to Hendricks. "Counsel, you may proceed." Hendricks stood, calm and deliberate. "Your Honor, what you just witnessed is exactly what these letters were about. A man who cannot control his temper, who cannot respect truth, who cannot respect the wishes of his father. The letters are not the ramblings of a confused man. They are the careful testimony of someone who saw through deception and chose to protect what mattered most." For the first time, Paul looked uncertain. He sat back down, his jaw clenched, his face pale as the proceedings continued. I kept glancing at Mom. She avoided my eyes, but I could see it, the shame, the fear, and something else too. Relief. Because the truth was out. Not the whole truth, not yet, but enough to shatter the image Paul had built for himself. Enough to tip the scales. When the gavel finally struck to adjourn, the judge's words echoed in my head. "The court will need to review these letters further, but I find sufficient cause to reject the challenge at this time. Mr. Galton's claims of undue influence lack merit." It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. The balance of power was changing. Paul stormed out of the courtroom, his lawyer trailing after him. But before he left, he stopped just long enough to hiss in my ear. "This isn't finished. You think you've won because of some letters? You have no idea what's coming." And the way he said it, it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a promise. The courthouse steps felt colder than the courtroom itself. The sky was overcast, heavy with clouds that looked ready to split open. Reporters lingered near the bottom, microphones in hand, waiting like vultures for scraps of drama. Mom walked beside me, clutching her purse like it was a shield. She hadn't spoken since the letter about her had been read aloud. Finally, she whispered, "He wasn't wrong." I stopped. "What do you mean?" She looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw decades of guilt etched into her face. "Your father was right. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you boys. I left because I couldn't survive in that house. Your brother's cruelty didn't start last year. It started when he was a child. And your father? He turned. Blind eye." Her voice trembled, but it was steady enough to carry the truth. I felt sick. My stomach twisted like I'd swallowed broken glass. "Are you saying Dad knew?" Mom's eyes brimmed with tears. "He knew, and he buried it, just like he buried everything else. Those letters," she shook her head, almost in disbelief. "Those letters are him trying to repent, but they don't erase the years of silence." Before I could respond, a voice cut through the air. "Enjoy your moment, little brother." Paul was standing at the bottom of the steps, reporters forming a half circle around him. His lawyer was already giving a statement about a grieving family and questionable evidence. Paul, though, wasn't speaking to them. He was speaking to me. His smile was thin, sharp as glass. "You think Dad's letters changed the story? You think they make you some kind of hero?" He took a step closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "You don't know half of what's buried. You don't know what I know." Then, just as quickly, he turned on his heel and strode away, the cameras following his every move. I stood there frozen, Mom's hand gripping my arm. "What does he mean?" I asked her. She swallowed hard. "It means he's desperate. And when Paul is desperate, he gets dangerous. That night, I sat alone in Dad's study, the stack of letters spread out before me. I read them again and again, searching for something I'd missed. Some clue about what Paul meant dot, and then I found a dot in the last letter, the one Dad had tucked into the back of the desk drawer. There was a line I hadn't noticed before. If Paul ever claims the company by blood, remind him that not all blood is his to claim. My chest tightened. The words seemed to burn on the page. Not all blood is his to claim. I didn't know what it meant. But something told me it was the key to everything dot, and if Paul already knew, then I wasn't just fighting for the inheritance anymore. I was fighting for the truth of who we really were. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dad's words seared into the darkness. Not all blood is his to claim. It gnawed at me until I couldn't sit still anymore. At 2 a.m, I went back into Dad's study. The desk smelled faintly of old tobacco and cedar polish, as if his presence still lingered. I opened every drawer, pulled out files, rifled through yellowed folders of contracts and share agreements. Nothing. Finally, I noticed a false panel at the bottom of the largest drawer. My heart pounded as I pried it loose. Inside was a smaller envelope, brittle with age. Dad's handwriting sprawled across it, for the day when truth becomes heavier than silence. I hesitated, hands trembling, before tearing it open. Inside were 2 things: a faded birth certificate and a letter. The birth certificate wasn't mine. It wasn't Paul's either. It belonged to someone named Michael Rowan, born just a year after me. Mother, Margaret Rowan. Father, not listed. My pulse hammered in my ears as I unfolded the letter. Son, if you are reading this, then I failed to stop the fire I lit long ago. Paul is not your full brother. He is not mine by blood. Your mother had an affair. I kept it hidden to protect the family name, but Paul always suspected, and it hardened him. He built his cruelty on the cracks I refused to repair. If he demands the company by blood, remember his claim is only half true, and it is time the other half is spoken. I sat back, my whole body numb. My father had carried this secret for decades, and now it sat in my hands like a live grenade. Paul wasn't even Dad's son. No wonder Dad had left everything to me. No wonder Paul had spent his whole life trying to dominate me, belittle me, prove himself. He must have known, or at least suspected. And if the will had been read without the letters, Paul would have claimed Dad's empire in the name of legacy. But legacy wasn't his to claim. The next morning, I called Mr. Turner, Dad's lawyer. When I told him what I'd found, there was a long silence on the other end. Finally, he said, "You understand this changes everything?" "Yes," I said quietly. "It changes everything." Later that week, we met in his office again. This time, only Mom, Mr. Turner, and I sat around the heavy oak table. Mr. Turner carefully placed the birth certificate and Dad's letter beside the will. "Legally," he said, "this means Paul has no rightful claim to the company or estate. But if this goes public, it won't just destroy Paul. It could destroy the family's reputation entirely. Your father clearly struggled with this. His will reflects his wish to keep Paul provided for, but not in control. What you do with this information is now your choice." My throat was dry. "And if I don't reveal it?" Mr. Turner folded his hands. "Paul will keep fighting you. He will smear you in the press, question the validity of the letters, dragged this family through years of litigation. He's already started. Mom's voice was soft but steady. And if you do reveal it, he'll never forgive you. He'll see it as the final betrayal. I stared at the documents, the weight of them crushing me. I never wanted war. I never wanted secrets. I just wanted peace. But peace had been buried long before I ever stepped into that courtroom. And maybe it was time the dead stopped carrying the truth. The confrontation came faster than I expected. Paul stormed into my house 2 days later, uninvited as always. His face was red, his tie loose, his hair slicked back in the way he thought made him look intimidating. Without a word, he threw a stack of papers onto my dining table. "Explain this," he barked. The papers were copies of the letters Dad had left me. He must have gotten wind of them through someone at Turner's office, or maybe Mom. My stomach twisted. "You've been holding on to these? Planning to ambush me with some pathetic attempt to smear me?" His voice was trembling, not with weakness, but with fury. "Paul," I said carefully, "these aren't for me to smear you. They're Dad's words, his truth." He laughed a sharp, bitter sound. "Truth? Don't lecture me about truth. You've always been his favorite, always the golden boy. And now you want to take everything from me? His company, his house, his name." I kept my voice low. "It wasn't me, Paul. It was Dad. He wrote those letters. He made the choice because you poisoned him against me." He jabbed a finger into my chest. "You whispered in his ear, turned him against his own son." I couldn't help it. The words spilled out before I could stop them. "You were never his son, Paul." The silence that followed was unbearable. His face went pale, like I'd ripped the floor out from under him. For a moment, I thought he might collapse. Then his expression hardened into something darker than I'd ever seen. "You think a piece of paper changes who I am?" His voice was low, almost a growl. "That man raised me. He fed me, clothed me, built this empire with me at his side. You were too weak, too timid. I was the one in the boardroom, in the field, in his shadow, earning every scrap of respect this family ever had. And now you think you can erase that with a birth certificate?" He shoved the papers back into my chest. "You'll regret this. If you reveal it, you'll destroy us both. The press won't care about truth. They'll care about scandal. Mom's reputation, the family name, they'll burn it all down. And when the ashes settle, don't think for a second anyone will see you as the noble son. They'll see you as the coward who hid behind Daddy's secrets until it suited him." His words cut deep because they weren't entirely wrong. I hated the idea of airing our family's shame to the world. But I also knew what silence had already cost us. Paul leaned in close, his breath hot and bitter. "So here's what's going to happen. You keep quiet. You sign the papers transferring control of the company to me. You can keep your little inheritance, your house, your money, whatever scraps you want. But the company, that's mine. Always has been. Always will be." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time I saw the truth. This wasn't about Dad anymore. It wasn't even about blood. It was about Paul's need to dominate, to erase me, so he could finally believe he was enough. I shook my head slowly. "No, Paul, not this time." His eyes narrowed into slits. He opened his mouth to spit another threat, but I cut him off. "You've lived your whole life trying to prove you're worthy of something that was never yours too. claim. Dad didn't deny you because of me. He denied you because he knew you'd tear it apart. And you're proving him right. Paul's fist clenched, his knuckles white. For a second, I thought he might hit me. But instead, he slammed his hand on the table so hard the glasses rattled. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "I'll make sure of it." And with that, he stormed out, leaving the papers scattered across the table like broken pieces of our family. I sank into a chair, my body trembling. The war was no longer coming. It had already begun. The next morning, I woke to find my phone buzzing nonstop. Missed calls, voicemails. A flood of emails. Paul had moved faster than I expected. He'd called an emergency board meeting at the company, rallying allies with whispers about my mental instability and obsession with Dad's private affairs. He was painting me as unhinged, a grieving son unraveling, desperate to cling to scraps of relevance. That one voicemail chilled me to the bone. It was from Turner, Dad's old lawyer. His voice was tight, urgent. "Son, you need to come to the office. Now, Paul is trying to push through documents that will cut you out of decision-making entirely. If he succeeds, you won't have a say in the company or the estate's assets. I can stall, but you need to decide if you're willing to put everything on the table, the letters, the truth, all of it." I stared at the phone, my hand frozen. This was the moment Dad had warned me about. The line between protecting the family's image and protecting his legacy had collapsed by noon. I was seated in the boardroom, a sleek, cold place with glass walls and polished oak that always made me feel like a trespasser. Paul was already there, seated at the head of the table like a conquering general. His smile was thin, triumphant. "Well, look who decided to join us," he said, his voice dripping with mock warmth. "I was beginning to think you'd finally learned your place." The board members, most of them old family friends or business partners, looked uneasy. Some avoided my eyes. Others leaned toward Paul, sensing where the power was shifting. Turner cleared his throat, rising to his feet. "Before we proceed, I think it's important we acknowledge the existence of certain documents left by the late Mr. Dalton. Documents that may have bearing on inheritance, succession, and family matters." Paul's eyes flashed, and he slammed his palm on the table. "Objection. Those so-called documents are nothing more than personal ramblings, letters written in grief and confusion. They have no legal weight and no place here." Turner's gaze was calm, but I could see the strain around his eyes. "They are the words of the man who built this company, Mr. Dalton. Words that reveal intent. The board deserves to hear them." The room grew tense. All eyes turned to me. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the stack of letters Dad had written. Paul laughed loud, mocking, theatrical. "Of course, here comes the show. My brother, desperate for Daddy's approval, dragging us all through his pity parade." He turned to the board. "Gentlemen, ladies, do you really want the press finding out about these family squabbles? Do you want shareholders asking why we're airing dirty laundry instead of running a company? Because that's where this is headed." His words hung in the air like a trap. He was right. If this went public, the company would take a hit. Reputations could crumble. And if I faltered now, I'd look weak, indecisive, exactly what Paul wanted. I unfolded the first letter. My voice shook at first, but then steadied. "To my son, the one who bore my name, but not my blood. I raised you as my own, but I cannot give you what you demand. A company is not built on entitlement. It is built on character, and character cannot be faked. The room went silent. Paul's smirk faltered. I continued, to my other son, the one who carries my blood and my doubts. I ask you to find strength, not in the shadows of resentment, but in the light of what's right. If you are reading this, it means the truth has come due. Do not let lies rule over legacy. My throat tightened, but I pushed through, reading every word, every confession, every plea Dad had left behind. When I finished, the silence was deafening. Paul was pale, trembling with fury. You think this changes anything? He spat. These are words, nothing more. I built this company with him while you were hiding behind books and excuses. The board knows who the real son is, but the faces around the table told a different story. Doubt had seeped in. For the first time, Paul looked vulnerable. Turner leaned forward. The late Mr. Dalton's wishes are clear. The company passes to his biological heir, with stipulations for responsible stewardship. Unless this board chooses to ignore his voice entirely, there is no debate. Paul shot to his feet. His chair clattered to the floor. You'll regret this, he roared, pointing at me. I'll drag you through the mud, both of you. The press will have a field day. You'll be ruined, and when you are, don't think for a second I won't be standing there laughing. He stormed out, the glass door slamming so hard it rattled. For a long moment. No one moved. Then Turner turned to me. The war has begun, son. The question is, how far are you willing to fight? The days that followed felt like walking through a minefield. Paul wasted no time unleashing his counterattack. Newspapers, blogs, even business channels began running with headlines about Dalton family feud and inheritance meltdown. Somehow, private details, half-truths, twisted into full-blown scandals made their way into the press. One article claimed I had been mentally unstable for years, that my father had quietly sidelined me from business decisions because of my fragile state. Another insinuated that the letters were forgeries, penned by me in some desperate bid to seize power. The worst came late one evening when I turned on the TV and saw Paul himself, sitting across from a sharp-tongued financial journalist. He leaned forward, his voice dripping with feigned concern. I love my brother. I really do, he said, adopting a tone that made me want to hurl the remote at the screen. But he's troubled. Always has been. Our father knew it. We tried to protect him from the stress of business, but now, sadly, he's trying to rewrite history for attention. It breaks my heart. The interviewer nodded gravely, as though Paul were some saintly martyr burdened with a difficult sibling. Turned off the TV and sat in the dark, my fists clenched. He wasn't just fighting for control. He was rewriting my entire identity, painting me as an unstable, bitter man clinging to scraps. That night, I sat with Dad's letters spread across my dining table, reading them again and again. His words were raw, flawed, deeply human, but they were real. He had wrestled with regret, with secrets he couldn't say aloud, with the burden of a truth that only surfaced in ink. Turner called me the next morning. He's playing dirty, and he's good at it. The media loves a villain, but they also love a redemption story. The question is, are you willing to step into the spotlight? Not just with the board, but publicly. If you want to counter Paul's narrative, you'll need to speak. The thought made my stomach twist. I had never been comfortable in the glare of attention, but hiding was no longer an option. 2 days later, I found myself seated opposite. A different journalist, one who had built her reputation on exposing corporate scandals and family dramas. She was sharp, direct, and I knew she wouldn't coddle me. "Why now?" she asked as the cameras rolled. "Why bring these letters forward after your father's death? Some say it's opportunism." I steadied myself, inhaling slowly. "Because they are his truth, not mine, not Paul's his. My father left words he couldn't speak in life. If we bury them, then we're burying him all over again." Her gaze sharpened. "Your brother says you're mentally unfit to lead, that you've always lived in his shadow. What do you say to that?" I didn't flinch. "I say shadows only exist when someone blocks the light. My father knew who cast those shadows. That's why he wrote what he did. And if anyone doubts the authenticity of these letters, we'll prove it. Forensic analysis, handwriting experts, you name it. I have nothing to hide." When the interview aired, the response was explosive. Some viewers called me brave, others naive. But the tide began to shift. The authenticity of the letters became a heated debate, drawing experts, commentators, and analysts into the fray. Paul fired back with lawsuits, claiming defamation of character and forgery, but Turner was ready. Within weeks, we had handwriting experts verify the letters, voice recordings from Dad's old dictation tapes that matched phrasing, even timestamps and postmarks to corroborate their authenticity piece by piece. Paul's campaign of smoke and mirrors began to crack dot, and came the moment I hadn't expected. A woman contacted Turner's office, a name I didn't recognize. She claimed to have known my father intimately, decades ago. At first, I thought it was another ploy, maybe even one of Paul's plans. But when she arrived, she brought with her a box. Inside were letters. More of them. Some were to her, confessions of his regrets and fears. Others were to me, letters he had written, but never sent. My hands trembled as I opened the first one. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Son, if you're reading this, it means I failed again to tell you to your face what you deserved to hear long ago. I am proud of you, not for the deals you made or the life you lived, but because you bore the weight of my silence without breaking. I gave your brother the world and left you with questions. That was my sin. Forgive me if you can, but if you cannot, know at least this: I loved you in ways I did not know how to say." I had to stop reading. My vision blurred. For the first time, the anger and bitterness cracked, replaced by something heavier, something rawer. Dad's voice, finally saying what I had needed all my life. And I knew then, this wasn't just about inheritance or boardrooms. This was about redemption, his and maybe mine. The box of letters shifted the ground beneath everything. For weeks, the battle had been about money, control, and public perception. But now, with these unsent words, the fight turned into something deeper, something spiritual almost. It was no longer Paul versus me. It was Paul versus the undeniable truth of who our father had been, and what he had left behind. Doc Turner read through them carefully, his brow furrowed in quiet concentration. "These," he finally said, tapping one of the envelopes, "are dynamite. Not just legally, they're emotionally devastating. Paul's argument that the letters were forged is dead in the water. These came from a separate source, a separate recipient. The authenticity will be nearly impossible to dispute. And if he tries? I asked. Turner smirked faintly. Then we let the world watch him choke on his own lies. But Paul didn't choke easily. He doubled down, calling press conferences where he thundered about conspiracies and plots to dismantle the Dalton legacy. He even tried to drag the woman who delivered the letters through the mud, hiring private investigators to smear her reputation. Only it backfired. She wasn't some opportunist. She was a quiet, dignified woman who had loved my father in her youth and had kept his word safe out of respect. When she appeared in court, calm and composed, describing my father's handwriting quirks and his tendency to write letters he never sent, she became a symbol of credibility. The courtroom was tense that day. Paul sat across the aisle from me, his jaw tight, his suit immaculate as always. But there was a flicker in his eyes, a twitch, a nervous tick that I had never seen before. The judge examined the evidence, listened to experts, and finally leaned back with a weary sigh. The letters are authentic, he ruled. There is no reasonable basis to claim otherwise. The inheritance stands as written. It should have felt like victory. But in that moment, watching Paul's face contort between rage and disbelief, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt. Emptied out he stood, slamming his palms against the table. This is a travesty. My brother is not fit to carry our father's name, let alone his empire. His voice cracked, the polished mask slipping. I was the one who built this with Dad. I was the one who sacrificed. And now I'm supposed to watch him take it all because of some scribbled apologies? The courtroom fell silent. For once, Paul wasn't the composed, golden child. He was raw, desperate. I rose slowly, my voice quiet but steady. Dad didn't give me the empire. Paul, he gave me the truth. That's what you can't stand, because the truth doesn't bend to you. For a heartbeat, he looked like he might lunge across the aisle. Instead, he stormed out, cameras flashing as he shoved past reporters. In the days that followed, his empire of manipulation crumbled. Investors pulled back. His allies distanced themselves, and his public persona once untouchable fractured. Me? I sat alone in my study one night. The letters spread around me again. The last one, the one that had been hardest to read, lay on top. Son, if you inherit nothing else from me, inherit this. Do not let bitterness define you. I let pride rob me of peace. Don't make the same mistake. I stared at the words for a long time. Then I picked up my phone, got Paul, answered after several rings, his voice hoarse. What do you want? I swallowed hard. Gotta fight. Not anymore. Dad's gone, Paul. The letters, whether you hate them or not, they're what he left us. You can keep tearing yourself apart, or we can find a way forward. I don't want his empire. I want his peace. Silence. Then a laugh, bitter, broken. Peace? You think peace erases decades? You think it erases what he did? What you took? No, I said softly. But it might stop us from destroying what's left. The line went dead. I don't know if Paul will ever forgive me, or Dad. Maybe he'll keep fighting shadows until they consume him. But as I placed the letters back in their box, sealing them carefully, I felt something I hadn't in years. Not victory, not vindication. Release. And maybe, just maybe, that was what Dad had meant all along.